Hello there and welcome to review lecture number 3. In this one we're going to combine everything on states of consciousness and drugs. Again, I'm trying to make these shorter than the actual lecture, so it's just kind of a brief rundown of all the things that you knew at one point and are still in your brain somewhere, and after this you can go on Quizlet and review. If there's ever any lectures that you feel like, nope, I don't need to review this, you can kind of scan through the PowerPoint maybe, and then go straight to Quizlet. Some people emailed me about whether or not you should be on Science Login. I think the best bang for your buck right now is Quizlet. You need to know vocab. You need to know all the vocab. Remember, if you're still getting about 50% of the vocab right, you are on track to pass the test. So let's review states of consciousness and drugs that alter states of consciousness. So remember, this unit goes over sleep, hypnosis, and then the drugs that alter it. And remember, it's kind of a short unit, so not too much vocab on it. You need to know basic big things like the stages of sleep and then the drugs and what they do. So remember that consciousness is a state of awareness. When you are sleeping, you are not conscious. When you are awake, you are. And that there's drugs that alter those states of consciousness. So that might, when you are, on psychedelic drugs, even though you are awake, you might not be conscious of what's going on. Your sleep patterns that we're going to talk about. Oh, here, let me go through these real quick. So your states of consciousness. So remember that there's some that occur spontaneously, right? So daydreaming, drowsiness, and dreaming. Spontaneously, that means they happen at different times throughout the day. Some are psychologically induced. Remember, those are drugs. So hallucinations during sex, during eating a lot of food, or oxygen starvation, or not enough food, or too much oxygen. So sometimes those altered levels of what we need in our body, food and oxygen, can alter states of consciousness. And some are psychologically induced. Remember that their brain. So sensory deprivation, hypnosis, and meditations are ways to alter states of consciousness by just thinking about changing those. So let's go into a little bit more the science of sleep. Remember, there's a lot of studies, or not studies, I'm sorry, theories on why we sleep and why we dream. I'll go over that vocab here in just a second. So remember that our bodies run on circadian rhythms. They're our body's natural biological clock. Right now they're about 24 hours, but there's a little bit of research that's pushing it more towards the 25 because of our constant awareness of light. Remember that if we just went off of the daylight in our day, that we probably should be asleep a lot earlier, but because we have all of this electricity, unnatural light, that they're actually pushing our circadian rhythms a little past the 24-hour cycle. Remember that circadian rhythms can change with temperature and the seasons, and we'll talk about disorders like SAD, the seasonal affective disorder, that can actually cause depression when seasons change, and that the SCN, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, is the part of your brain that's responsible for producing melatonin. And all you need to know is melatonin is associated with sleep. So melatonin can cause sleep. Our biological rhythms and sleeps in the brain. We just talked about the SCN, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, produces the melatonin, but remember that light that comes in stops the production of melatonin. And so that's why if you're around a lot of light at night, it's sometimes difficult to go to sleep. Even in front of a computer screen, it's difficult to go to sleep because light actually stops. It produces GABA, so an inhibitory, and it inhibits the production of melatonin in the pineal gland, which is where the suprachiasmatic nucleus is located. Your sleep stages. So there's a lot of mnemonic devices that we talked about for remembering the stages of sleep. So remember that your first one, when you are awake, you have alpha waves. Actually, let me pause it and get a board real quick. Sorry, I want to get a board. I realized yesterday you couldn't see what I was drawing on the board. So remember that when you are awake, that is your alpha waves, and then that's being very alert. So if you are completely alert, aware, you're awake, alpha, all those things. Aware, awake, alpha. Remember, beta is our awareness, but you're kind of in a drowsy state. You're about to fall asleep. So stage 1 of sleep, we're going to talk about the stages real quick. So stage 1 of sleep, that's where you have, you're starting to go to sleep and you have those hypnagogic, right here, hypnagogic sensations and kind of the daydreaming. The hypnagogic is when you have those fear of like falling, where it's like you're falling asleep and it feels like all of a sudden you're falling down in class or like when you're laying down. So stage 1 is when you're about to go to sleep. So remember, alpha is awake, beta, it means like you're about to go to sleep, and we're looking at brain activity, right? So EKGs, and this is where we get our stages and our different types of waves or electronic waves or electro waves from our nerves. And then so stage 2 is when we get our sleep spindles. Remember, so here's the board that we talked about in class. I'm going to put it up here. So remember our stage 1, I'm going to go like this. We have our alpha, which is very awake, our beta, where we're about to go to sleep, and 2, you can remember, kind of like a spindle that's going down into deeper sleep. So our sleep spindles, and are kind of these like erratic little waves that we get in our brain, they're the ones that are like causing us to go to sleep. Stage 3 is just a transition stage. There's nothing that really particularly interesting that happens in 3, and 4 is where I get my delta. And so you can remember that the 4th letter of the alphabet is D, the 4th stage of sleep. You get delta. So I tried to put that here too. So you've got 4 delta. So 1 we get alpha, beta, 2 spindles, 3 is transition, and 4 I get my delta. After that we get our REM sleep. Your REM sleep is your rapid eye movement. It's where dreams occur. So you'll need to know these types of stages, and here are the waves we just went over. So look at, this is where we're actually going to get the EKG, the electricity that goes on in our brain, these different waves. So awake and relax, we get those alpha waves. Stage 1 sleep, remember it's like you're about to fall asleep. 2, we get those spindles where it can cause us to feel like we're flying. 3 is just a transition stage to my delta waves. So A, B, no C, and here's D, right? And then my REM, I get these places in my REM sleep where I get rapid eye movement. Your eyes literally go back and forth really quick. A lot of times, or the theory behind that is because you're dreaming, right? You're seeing something, so your eyes are moving along with it. So remember that our REM sleep, rapid eye movement, versus our NREM sleep. So REM sleep is considered paradoxical sleep because our brain is completely active and the rest of our body shuts off. So paradox is when two things can contrast each other or opposite of each other. So REM sleep, my brain is completely active, my body shuts off. My non-REM sleep are the other stages. So all the other ones, 1 through 4 here, I'll go like this, bring back up. My 1 through 4 are my non-REM. This is my REM sleep, right? My brain's active, my body's still active, and this one down here, it's just my brain that's active. So a typical night's sleep, you have 90-minute cycles for those. And remember, though, that they need to go up and down. So here's the chart that we looked at, that you go from stage 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And that you go back up and then you hit REM, right? So there are these cycles that happen, and these last about 90 minutes. Remember that the beginning of your sleep, you hit that stage 4 early in the night. As you go on, you stop hitting stage 4 and you just go back and forth very quickly between sleep spindles and REM. So REM and sleep spindles. This is why a lot of the times towards when you go to wake up, you remember dreaming, because right before you wake up, you're most likely in the REM stage. Now, the theories behind why we sleep. There's a lot of different debates on why we sleep, and depending on the perspective, kind of explains why we sleep. So remember that there was a lot of studies done with the Navy on sleep deprivation and an institute, and looking at as we get older, how we lose sleep. So some things you need to know about sleep: as you get older, you stop sleeping as much, you don't need as much sleep. Chronic sleep loss can cause things like sickness and psychological disorders. And there's something in the spring and the fall when the time changes that alters our sleep and can actually affect our behaviors. Okay, so here is some, the thing that we're talking about, the sleep loss in the spring and the fall when we lose sleep and gain sleep. We actually have our behaviors when we get more sleep. Right here, there's actually fewer accidents the day after everyone gains an hour of sleep. The day after we lose an hour of sleep, there's actually more accidents. So sleep does affect behavior. Here are some of the theories on why we sleep. So these ones, kind of looking at the perspective, that the sleep protects our brain. It gives us time to rest and rewire. So that's a biological point of view. Recuperation, right? Like resting is for biological. Memory storage. So having, when you dream, it's thought that those memories go from long-term or short-term to long-term. This is why they say to study right before you go to bed, let those memories hardwire, or kind of your brain settle it out, versus studying when there'll be interference afterwards. Creative thinking, and then growth. So these are all biological, right? So when you're young, you need a lot of sleep because your body needs time in order to grow. Sleep disorders then. So some things you need to know vocab-wide. Being an insomniac is when you can't sleep, right? You guys are pretty aware of these things. Narcolepsy is when you randomly fall asleep. right? So narcolepsy is like you're just awake and then all of a sudden you're asleep. Sleep apnea is when you actually stop breathing for short periods of time during the night. And night terrors, you have no memory of night terrors. They're opposite from nightmares. Night terrors terrify your parents because you're screaming, but you have no memory of it. And then sleepwalking talking is not a disorder that you'll be tested on, but it's something that when your body is still moving, but your brain is shut off. All right, so why we dream. So talking about dreams, remember there's a lot of different theories. Manifest content versus latent content. Knowing that the latent content is like the stuff that's left behind, and the manifest content is the actual like storyline of it. So look these two up in your vocab. Manifest destiny, remember we talked about that a lot, and like latent being like latent fingerprints, like what's left behind it. Your why we dreams, these you don't really know about. Yeah, you don't need to know any of these. REM, remember we talked about over a lifetime. Look at our REM sleep when we're younger, being an infant. We have a lot of REM sleep versus when we get older, you dream less. That's kind of sad, right? Your NREM sleep also decreases, though, as you get older, and your waking hours increase. You just need less sleep as you get older. It's actually a thought on why we have memory loss as we get older. We start getting as much sleep. And then some of our dream theories. Freud, remember everything with him was kind of freaky. Like he thought you were trying to fulfill some weird, thoughts that you had or wishes that you had. Information processing, that's where you process the information from the day. Physiological, that's your brain. Activation synthesis, that because your eyes start moving, so activation, your eyes start moving, it synthesizes, your brain wants to make sense of why your eyes are moving, and so it evokes random visuals and your brain's trying to make sense of it. And then cognitive development, that where you are cognitively is reflected in your dreams. So at a younger age, you dream about different things than when you are older. So cognitive development has a direct correlation on our dreams. I'll get rid of this board. All right, so hypnosis is an altered state of consciousness. There's hypnotic induction. We talked about like the sway, where you can go into their brains and make them do things that they wouldn't do normally. You can like plant information in there, and they'd only remember in a hypnotic state. Remember that this is used as a therapy in a lot of the ways to calm people down. We looked at postural sway in class, where you closed your eyes and said you are swaying. And then we looked at, though, also holding the ice cube and trying to get you into a state of calmness even though you're in a state of pain. So that is also a type of hypnosis. Remember the falsehoods that the post-hypnotic suggestions occur in therapy. That's like after hypnosis, you're given like a suggestion of something you should do in your life, like be more calm. These are used for like if you're scared of things a lot, for phobias, things like that. And then we looked at it to alleviate pain. We looked at, though, the falsehood of that it can act against your will. Explaining hypnotic state, good hypnotic social influence theory. Oh, this was kind of interesting, that people that were pretending to be hypnotized did the same exact things as the people that were actually hypnotized. Dissociation, blah, blah, blah. We don't need to know this stuff. All right, the drugs. Let's go over that chart really quick. So psychoactive drugs are drugs that alter your state of consciousness. They make you feel an altered state, from awake, asleep. You hallucinate. You may not make memories, things like that. There's a lot of research with the dependence and addiction. You need to know these words that go along with it. Your tolerance is how much of that drug that you can tolerate before it makes an effect on your behavior. Remember that the more drugs you do, the more you drink, your tolerance level goes up. So you need more alcohol to feel the same effect than someone else who might have a lower tolerance. Withdrawals are when you're coming off of the drug or the alcohol or whatever the the altered state is. You have a physical withdrawal and perhaps a mental withdrawal. So there's two types of dependence. When you're dependent on something, you can be physically dependent, like physically shaking, feeling pain, versus psychologically dependent on it means like, I don't feel good unless I have this thing, right? So physical, shaking, vomiting, pain. Psychological is just feeling down, not feeling well without the drug. Addiction then is when it alters your behaviors in order to have that drug. There's different research with whether or not it's genetically linked. There is some genetic component to addiction, but not all people that have that genetic component become addicted. So this is the perfect kind of situation we talked about with nature and nurture. Is it because I was born with that gene, or because I'm put in situations of highly addictive environments? Okay, so the 3 different drugs you need to know are depressants, stimulants, and hallucinogenics. Remember, depressants do not mean that they make you sad. It just means that it depresses your central nervous system. So suppressants are things like alcohol, barbiturates, and opiates. So if you can remember that depressants slow down your system, they lower your reaction time, they decrease your heart rate, they decrease your breathing rate. So these are things that calm people down. If you've ever seen people drinking, they're usually not sad, right? Like they're very happy. So it's not a state of being depressed, it's a state of your body, your central nervous system being depressed. Opiates are things that block pain. If you've ever seen people on painkillers, very calm people. So I just went through this. So you've got disinhibition, right? More likely to act, slower neural processing, reduced self-awareness and self-control, right? Like you can't control yourself, things like that. Memory distribution, not making memories. Other ones are barbiturates, so they're things that tranquilize, opiates, things like that block pain. Your stimulants then are the opposite. They're the ones that are going to increase your heart rate. They increase your breathing. They increase your reaction time, right? Make you very like jerky, right? People that do meth, lots of caffeine is considered a stimulant, right? People with a lot of caffeine talk really fast, like Miss Myers, right? And the kind of like jerky people. So this would be an extreme from meth to caffeine. They're both stimulants, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's always bad. Things that stimulate your central nervous system just make your reaction times increase. So other things are like nicotine, cocaine, ecstasy, MDMA. This is another one that alters your state of consciousness, but is also a stimulant. We talked about that it's very dangerous to mix the stimulants and depressants. So taking ecstasy, drinking alcohol, slows down my heart rate, increases my heart rate, causes heart attack or heart failure, right? So mixing those two is very bad for your body. So stimulants, nicotine, you don't really need to know this stuff. It just increases. It acts as an agonist. So cocaine acts like an agonist of dopamine. It means that it makes your brain think that there's more dopamine in there than there actually is. Hallucinogenic, so then, are not stimulants or depressants. They're totally different strands. So anything that makes you hallucinate. So hear things, see things that aren't actually there. LSD, acid, marijuana, and THC have been shown to have hallucinogenics with it. We've talked about THC and marijuana are actually kind of this really messy mechanism. They do a lot of it. Some of it's a depressant in your body, and then also hallucinogenics, or I'm sorry, makes you hallucinate. The influence then of drug use, remember we talked about there's some biological influences, also social and cultural. Here's a chart. It's also in your book if you want to go back through. So depressants, alcohol, heroin is an opiate, right? It's a pain reducer. Stimulants, and with a mild hallucinogenic, but still up here, and then a mild hallucinogen, acid, LSD, marijuana. Here's the level of analysis, looking at drug use, how all these things influence how you use drugs. Again, drugs can be something like nicotine and caffeine. So drug doesn't always mean bad, it just means it alters your state of consciousness. Okay, so from this point, we're done with that. You can go through and go back over that vocab. The next one's a big one. It's going to be on learning. So take your time, go through this vocab, and remember to comment on the website if you have any questions. I'll see you guys later.